All right. Now, let's read verses 6 through 11. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Then the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, "Where are you?" So he said, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat?" I think that there's a really interesting shift that happens here in this passage. I think it's interesting that this is the first time that Adam and Eve's physical senses are introduced to us. Look at that. So when the woman saw that the tree that was pleasant to the eyes, that it was desirable, then the eyes of both of them, and then they heard, and then they saw, and then they listened. Can I just interject to you that your senses and your emotions are terrible masters? They are terrible sources of what guides you. Could it be that instead of leaning on the Spirit, which they had done up until this point as they were walking with God, as they were talking with God, as they were fellowshipping through with Him in the cool of the day, could it be that it was this change in what they depended on that led them into disobedience and led them into sin? Could it be that it was because they began to depend upon their eyes? They began to depend upon what they could hear, what they could smell, what they could touch, what they could taste. Could it be that sin and disobedience are brought about even quicker in our lives when we depend on our senses instead of depending on the Spirit? And I don't think it's any different for us today. Because when we depend on what we see, we lose hope. When we depend upon what we hear, we feel that all is lost. If we can't lay our hands on it, then we question if it's really real. And then if we lose hope, if we lose this sense of a spiritual reality and a guidance, then we begin to fall away in our relationship with Jesus Christ because we become more dependent upon our senses than what we do His Spirit. If you find yourself at that place this morning, that's dangerous ground to be on. Because God is not defined by our senses, by our emotions, but it's actually the other way around. And this is the first time we see shame introduced. You see that? That, we heard you coming, again, that sense of we heard you coming, but they realized that they were naked, so they covered themselves, and then they hid. Guys, whenever we depend on our emotions, whenever we depend on our senses, that will lead us to shame and guilt every time, because guess what? We will never measure up. There's always going to be something wrong with us, especially if we view things through our senses and our emotions and we don't view them through God's Spirit. When we view them through God's Spirit, guess what? We look at it and we're not happy that it's there, but we have this realization that His strength is made perfect in my, what? Weakness. It's a different perspective on it.